Okay, so welcome to the second video in this series. So if you've been monitoring the Facebook page I had you seen a couple of days ago, I put up a link to a Scientific American article. And that's what I've been looking into and doing some investigation on to its sources itself. But basically what the article talks about is that dyslexics have an advantage when it comes to visual awareness, in that a dyslexic will take a look at the environment around him or her and be able to take the entire environment in as a single unit. And it references two specific articles, which I'll put links to in the description below. But essentially, the first article talks about visual learning, a visual learning style. So essentially, how dyslexic works, according to these two papers that I read, is essentially that the first paper talks about how the dyslexic will learn and view the world as a whole entire unit. So a dyslexic will walk into a room and take the room in as a single unit, or they will look at a table and take the table in as a single unit, and only later on in the visual processing process break it down into its legs and its chairs and what have you. And the same happens with reading and writing, or specifically reading, because a dyslexic will open a page and take the whole page in as one unit, and then after that break it down into its various individual bits and pieces. And the problem is that when you break it down to its little bits and pieces like that, you'll automatically start breaking the letters themselves down and grouping the letters together, and then from there you'll be able to form words, whereas a non-dyslexic will just take in each individual word. The second article that I read goes further into this and specifically focuses on reading. Now, there's a lot in the second article that I didn't really agree with. It focuses on dyslexia as being a disability and a disadvantage, and I don't personally believe that. Being a dyslexic myself, I may have a biased opinion here, but I was treated as a very young age, and I learned to work with and use my dyslexia as well, and I personally find it to be an advantage and an asset, and I've learned to use it as such. And because of that, when they say dyslexia has, well, the second article specifically talks about dyslexia having a genetic, all dyslexics I should say, having a huge problem with reading. Now, I personally don't have an issue with reading, I never have. Sure, okay, fine, when I was learning to read, things were a little bit difficult, but we all have trouble learning to read, and it's part of the learning process. The difference is my mother taught me to read differently. And it's that key, that unique thing that a dyslexic thinks differently. And that's what the second article goes into, which I personally found really interesting, because the first article was fascinating in and of its own right, and is actually much more extensive, and talks about the advantages of dyslexia, because it can take everything in at one single unit. A dyslexic is able to make comparisons that a non-dyslexic wouldn't, because a non-dyslexic will take everything in as its own individual bit and piece, whereas a dyslexic will take the whole room in as once, and naturally be able to make connections much more quickly, and be able to come up with creative solutions, because I have the whole solution in one unit far more quickly and far more easily. So if you're looking for a creative solution to a problem, keep in mind that the way a dyslexic mind works is kind of geared for that. And the first article specifically focused on the visual, because it's quantifiable, you can easily see it. And what they noticed was that a dyslexic was able to, when greeted with a familiar setting, was able to pick out the differences very, very quickly. So if you show them a picture 10, 15, 20 times, and then change one small detail, chances are a lot of the time a dyslexic would pick out that change a little bit more quickly, because a dyslexic would take in the whole unit, compare it to what it previously saw, and be able to pick up the change immediately, because it's one unit, as opposed to just breaking everything down. The second article explained how this happens. The second article has a lot of science involved in it, and what I mean by that is a lot of scientific terms, specifically focusing on the retina and the visual cortex and on all of that. But in layman's terms, what it effectively boiled down to was that the dyslexic person has almost a wider focal point. So when light goes into the eye and through the cornea, what it does is it focuses on the retina right at the back at a single point. Now, if this is a normal person, a dyslexic is a little bit wider. And because of that, they're able to take in far more at one unit. So when a dyslexic would look at a book, of course they would take the whole page because they would be focusing on the whole page at once rather than just the word. And now the way the article dealt with this, the article decided this was a problem and immediately said, okay, the simplest solution to this is just a page with a hole in it. So the dyslexic has to focus on the word and essentially narrowed the focal point of the retina, or at least induced some kind of neurological magic that I don't yet understand. But the point is that they viewed it as a problem. Now, I personally don't. If you're able to take in more information at one go, that's a good thing. That's a very powerful tool to have. And for me, it explains a huge amount. It explains why dyslexics would have a lot of trouble reading. Because if you're taking the whole page at a single unit, you then have to break it down. You then have to put it back together again, and only then can you read the whole thing. In fact, worse still, you have to take the whole page, break it down, break it down to its individual pieces, effectively the letters, put the letters back in together, find the word that you're trying to read, and then you can read the next word. And then you have to do it again and again and again and again and again for every single word. Now, I'm not suggesting that I have the solution for this. I know what worked for me. What worked for me was a system called paired reading, which my mother did, where essentially the tutor sits down with the dyslexic child and the two of them read together, pointing at the words, and when the child finds a word they struggle with, as any kid would when learning to read, the tutor automatically just gives a word and everybody carries on. And that worked great for me. Another method that I've seen is not teaching the alphabet first, but teaching the alphabet last, and rather teaching the dyslexic, or putting all the letters on a page and only focusing on, say, 2 or 3 a day, and telling the dyslexic to make each letter out of clay, because a dyslexic thinks in fully interactive three-dimensional environments. So they pick up a piece of clay and they make an A, of an uppercase A and a lowercase A, and now they know what an A is because they can feel it in their hands, and then they can explore it. Now, I've heard that method works very well. I've never tested it myself. I don't have any children, let alone any dyslexic ones, and I've never had an opportunity to teach them that. But those are two methods that have worked, and one of them worked for me. But what's exciting with these two papers is it explains a talent, a genetic talent, a genetic disposition that dyslexics have, and that is the ability to take in more information and process it more effectively and more quickly than a non-dyslexic. Now, I'm not for one moment saying that a dyslexic is better than a non-dyslexic. That's not what I'm about. But what I am saying is that that's a tool that a dyslexic can use. And saying that a dyslexic is wrong or that there's something bad because you can't do things the way regular people can is stupid. Any society that says because you're different there's something wrong with you is setting themselves up for failure. As a dyslexic, you need to find out what you're good at, and in this case it's the ability to take in information and process it and come up with a more creative solution a little bit more quickly. So the question now is, how do you use this in your own field? Well, I view myself as a software developer. That's my passion, it's what I love to do. For me, I look at code as a living organism, and I watch information flow through this, a lot like blood flows through a body, and I see the information changing depending on how the code does certain things. Now, when I'm writing the code, I view the... So when you're writing code, a lot of the time it's color-coded, and because I have this whole living organism in my head at once, and I can see the information flow through it, and I'm automatically immediately starting to develop the various bits and pieces in my head that need to be done. When it gets to the point at which the bit of code that I need to write, I already know how the colors should look. And especially once I know the language and I get to know it very clearly, I know how it should be indented, and I know what should be green, what should be blue, and what should be red and orange, and whatever interface I'm using, however it's color coded, I usually have a picture going in of how that should work. And if I load up the page, I have a picture in my mind of exactly what that code itself needs to look like on the page, and it allows me to debug things very, very quickly. Now, whatever field you're in, whatever profession you're in, understand that if you're dyslexic, you have a genetic disposition to taking in information at a far greater rate, because you can take in a whole portion of data at once, and then you can immediately start to process it very, very quickly. Let's say you're an artist. We see this with Michelangelo. He talked about how he didn't create the sculpture out of the rock, that the sculpture was already in the rock and he just carved around it. Think about something similar along those lines, that the information is already there and you're taking it a lot more quickly, and start to use that. I'm going to look into this further, and I'm going to keep looking out there for genetic traits that are advantageous for dyslexics and what we can do. Keep an eye on the page, and I will hopefully have an update next week for you.